My name is Brandy McLean, and I'm 38 years old. I'm sitting at my desk in the home office of my lakefront estate in Lake Havasu City, the afternoon sun glinting off the water when my phone lights up. It's the security guard at the main gate. "Ma'am, there are 3 people here, 2 older adults and a younger man. They're insisting they own the place and want to come in to start setting up for next year's family reunion. But their names aren't on the access list and they don't have an appointment." I switched to the live camera feed. There they are. My parents and my brother Lance, standing outside the gate in the Arizona heat, looking more and more uncomfortable as the guard calmly asks again, "Can you tell me exactly who you are and why you should have access to this property?" Silence. No answer. My parents banned me from the reunion after a decade of being ignored. They stormed straight into my lakefront property one day. When the security guard asked who they were, they fell silent. This time I was the one smiling. If you want to know how I went from being the family's invisible ATM to the one who finally locked the gate, stay with me. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a like if you've ever been treated like you didn't belong by the people who were supposed to love you most. The full story is wild, and it's coming right now. You're not going to want to miss what happened next. A few weeks earlier, Aunt Deborah called worried because she hadn't seen me at the reunion and invited me to drive up from Phoenix to her place in Scottsdale that weekend. I made the short drive on Saturday morning, the highway stretching out under clear Arizona skies. When I pulled into her driveway, my Aunt Deborah was already waiting at the door. She wrapped me in one of her familiar tight hugs, the kind that always made me feel like a kid again, and ushered me inside before I could even say hello. The house smelled like fresh coffee and the lemon polish she used on everything. She wasted no time guiding me straight to the living room and picking up the remote for the big flat screen on the wall. She opened a digital album she had put together from the weekend and started scrolling through the photos and short video clips people had shared. The screen filled with bright images of the lakefront estate on Lake Havasu. Everyone gathered on the expansive deck, the water sparkling behind them under perfect spring sunlight. There were shots of the big outdoor grill going strong, steaks and burgers smoking while people held plates and laughed. Others showed groups out on the boats, cruising slowly along the shoreline with drinks in hand. In one video clip, my brother Lance, 41, and as confident as ever, stood at the helm of the larger boat arm around his wife Whitney, while they waved at the camera. My parents appeared in the center of almost every group shot, beaming proudly beside the custom outdoor kitchen area, and my cousin Shelby popped up in several selfies taken against the sunset over the water. Aunt Deborah paused the slideshow and looked at me with genuine confusion. She explained that throughout the entire weekend, no one had brought up my name even once. At first, she figured I must have been buried in work deadlines the way I often was, and that I had simply sent regrets. But as the days passed and the conversations flowed, stories about past reunions, plans for next year, everything, no one asked where I was or mentioned missing me. It only struck her as truly odd on the drive home, and that was why she called the moment she unpacked. Those pictures stirred up memories I had tried to push down for years. I had made that same drive to Lake Havasu every spring for as long as the reunions had been running, showing up early to help arrange chairs and tables on the lawn, bringing carefully chosen gifts that usually went unacknowledged, and staying behind to clean up long after most people had gone inside or taken the boats out again. During meals, I sat toward the end of the long table, nodding along while others talked, contributing only when directly asked. Group photos always placed me slightly off to the side, smiling politely but never quite in the middle. What made it sting worse was knowing how much I had quietly done to keep the estate afloat. When property taxes started piling up and notices arrived, I routed payments through my holding company so no one would face liens or foreclosure risks. After a bad windstorm cracked several sections of the private dock, I covered the full repair costs without saying a word. The pool filtration system needed replacing a couple of years back, and the landscaping around the lakefront had grown overgrown. I handled those bills too, along with regular maintenance to keep the grounds looking pristine. I told myself it was for the family, that keeping the place intact would eventually mean something to them. Staring at those happy scenes where my absence seemed to make everything easier, the initial shock slowly turned into something sharper. Pain twisted into anger, and for the first time in years, I felt a real determination to confront what had been happening right in front of me all along. The next day, I drove over to my parents' house in the Phoenix suburbs. I chose to park a little down the street from their cul-de-sac, needing that short walk to gather my thoughts under the bright morning sun. The familiar neighborhood felt oddly distant as I approached rows of stucco homes with red-tiled roofs, tall saguaro cacti casting long shadows, and the faint scent of blooming orange blossoms in the air. Voices floated from the open sliding doors at the back, relaxed and cheerful, mixed with the occasional burst of laughter and the soft clatter of dishes being cleared from an outdoor table. I slipped along the side path and positioned myself near the corner of the house, out of view, but close enough to hear clearly. Lance was recounting highlights from the boats, describing how the group had stayed out longer than planned because the conditions were ideal. My parents added enthusiastic details about the meals and how seamlessly the schedule flowed. Then Mother remarked in her usual content tone after a successful event that the whole weekend had truly felt peaceful this time, with absolutely nothing weighing on the mood or causing any disruption. I walked onto the patio without giving myself time to hesitate. The conversation cut off mid-sentence. Father lowered his coffee mug slowly to the glass table. Mother reached to adjust her wide-brimmed hat, even though shade covered us completely, and Lance folded his arms across his chest while raising an eyebrow in mild surprise. I looked at each of them and asked why no one had invited me to the reunion this year. Mother hesitated, glancing toward Father for support, before offering a tight smile and explaining that they had concluded it would be better for everyone if I sat this one out, allowing the group to unwind fully without potential concerns arising. Father supported her immediately, saying they aimed for a straightforward, carefree few days and believed avoiding past patterns of strain was the kindest choice for all involved. Lance leaned forward, then direct as ever, and stated that the family deserved one annual event dedicated solely to members who meshed effortlessly and maintained positive energy throughout. He presented it as a simple, sensible decision that benefited the majority. I laid out how I had handled significant estate costs over the years, the steadily increasing property taxes that threatened delinquency notices, the extensive dock reconstruction following severe storm damage a while back, and the comprehensive insurance coverage that shielded the property from risks. They remained silent during my summary, but once I stopped, Mother responded with a soft sigh and said, "Such support was precisely what accomplished children provided for shared family holdings." Father echoed her, noting that financial help of that nature was valued in its place, yet did not automatically grant influence over traditions or guest lists. Their matter-of-fact responses stripped away any remaining illusions. The ease with which they reframed my efforts as mere obligation intensified the ache, turning it into a sharper resentment. Still, I refused to let emotion overtake me in front of them. I replied evenly that I now understood their perspective perfectly, then turned and headed back down the path to my car, maintaining composure even as the weight of their words pressed heavier with every step. Sitting back in my car outside the driveway, I pulled the folder from the trunk. The thick manila envelope had been waiting there since morning, filled with documents I had printed out just in case the conversation went exactly as it did. I flipped it open on the passenger seat and spread the pages across the console, starting with the most important one, the deed transfer agreement dated 4 years earlier. That was when my attorney, April Sargent, and my financial advisor, Gregory Lawson, had helped structure everything through my holding company. I traced the signatures at the bottom with my finger, my parents' familiar handwriting next to Lance's bolder scrawl. Back then, his boat rental business had hit rough waters, fast bleeding money from poor management and unexpected repair costs after a busy season. The estate taxes had piled up 2 threatening liens that could have forced a sale. They needed quick capital to keep both the company afloat and the lakefront property in the family name, so they agreed to transfer ownership to my company in exchange for an immediate infusion that covered the debts and gave Lance breathing room to restructure. At the time, they treated it like a temporary arrangement, assuming I would continue covering expenses indefinitely without ever enforcing full control. The language in the contract was clear, though sole ownership passed to the holding company with no reversion clause. April had made sure every detail was airtight, and Gregory handled the funding transfers smoothly, so no one felt the shift right away. I closed the folder for a moment and stared out the windshield at the quiet street. My phone sat in the center console, and I picked it up to call Gregory first. He answered on the second ring, his calm, professional voice steady as always. I told him it was time to close all joint accounts linked to the estate and stop the monthly transfers that had been going out automatically for maintenance and taxes. He confirmed the instructions without hesitation, saying he could have everything processed by end of day and would send written confirmation once completed. Next, I dialed April. She picked up from what sounded like her office downtown, papers rustling in the background. I asked her to review the transfer documents one more time and prepare any additional filings if needed to reinforce my sole ownership. She assured me the paperwork remained ironclad with timestamps and notarizations that left no room for challenges, and offered to draft a formal notice if things escalated. As I ended the call, memories of building my career in Phoenix surfaced unbidden. I had started in marketing straight out of college, working long hours to climb into executive roles at firms downtown, managing campaigns that brought in major clients and steady promotions. Success came steadily, but whenever I shared news with the family, it was met with polite nods before the conversation shifted back to Lance's latest venture or household needs. Over time, I realized they viewed my income more as a reliable resource than as proof of my own accomplishments, something to tap whenever shortfalls appeared. That realization settled heavily now, crystallizing years of quiet contributions into a clear pattern. I no longer felt the need to justify or soften their behavior in my mind. The decision formed solidly: no more explanations, no more bending to keep peace. Whatever belonged to me, including the estate I had protected all this time, would stay under my control from here on. 2 days later, the phone rang from the estate's security guard. I was working at my desk in the Phoenix apartment reviewing campaign reports for an upcoming client presentation when the dedicated property line lit up. The guard introduced himself by name and spoke in the measured tone they trained for these situations, explaining that a vehicle had just arrived at the main gate. It was a familiar silver SUV loaded with several plastic bins of decorations in the back seat and a couple of large coolers strapped in the cargo area. 4 people had stepped out, 2 older adults, a man in his early 40s, and a woman who stayed near the passenger side. He said they were insisting on immediate access, claiming they needed to start setting up early for next year's family reunion, and that this had always been their property to use whenever they wanted. The guard checked the updated authorized list I had emailed over right after my calls with Gregory and April, and none of their names appeared anywhere on it. The new instructions were clear: no entry without prior approval from me directly, or a scheduled appointment confirmed in advance. I thanked him for following protocol and asked him to switch to speaker while I pulled up the security app on my computer. The high-definition feed loaded quickly, showing the wide wrought iron gate under the intense Arizona midday sun. My parents stood right at the intercom box, father leaning in close as if volume alone could change the rules, while mother hovered just behind him, holding her sun hat in place against a light breeze. Lance paced a few steps away, phone in hand, like he might call someone to fix the problem. Whitney lingered by the open passenger door, arms loosely crossed, an expression shifting between impatience and growing uncertainty. The guard repeated his standard question calmly: "Ma'am, sir, can you please state exactly who you are and whether you have an appointment today?" And the response was a long, awkward pause. Father started with something about being the original family and having used the property for decades, but the words trailed off without any real authority. Mother looked to Lance for help, her face already flushing from the heat and embarrassment. Lance stepped up and tried a firmer approach, telling the guard he must be mistaken because this was private family business and they had every right to enter. The guard stood firm, explaining politely that ownership records and access rights had changed, and only listed parties could pass without direct owner permission. Watching the scene unfold in real time felt surreal. Mother's usual poise cracked further as she realized no amount of explaining was working. Her cheeks lost color despite the 90-degree temperature. Father's gestures grew smaller, his voice dropping as frustration mixed with confusion. Lance argued a little longer, raising his volume once before backing off, when the guard simply repeated the policy without budging an inch. Whitney's posture changed noticeably. She uncrossed her arms, glanced at the others, then at the closed gate, her brow furrowing in clear discomfort as the reality of the situation settled. I stayed silent on the line, letting the moment stretch. They had arrived assuming everything would proceed as it always had, with the estate available whenever they decided to claim it. Now they faced a physical barrier backed by legal reality, one I had finally enforced. A quiet smile spread across my face as I watched them regroup by the SUV defeated under the relentless sun. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted completely, and the satisfaction of that reversal ran deep, untainted by any lingering doubt. That evening, my phone vibrated. It was Whitney. I was winding down in the living room after a long day, feet propped up on the coffee table with a glass of iced tea cooling in my hand, flipping through leftover work emails on my tablet. Seeing her name on the caller ID caught me off guard since we had never really had private conversations before. I answered anyway, curious what could prompt the call at this hour. Her voice came through hesitant and a little shaky, as if she had practiced the words, but still struggled to get them out. She began with a soft apology for bothering me so late and asked if I had a moment to listen. I told her I did, setting the tablet aside and focusing completely on the call. Whitney went on to say she honestly had no idea the family had deliberately excluded me from the reunion planning. Lance had mentioned it in passing weeks earlier, framing it as me being too overwhelmed with deadlines and commitments to attend, adding that pushing the issue might only make things awkward. She confessed that his version sounded plausible back then, given how often my job kept me tied up and away from family events. But after everything that happened at the estate gate that afternoon, the pieces no longer fit. Watching my parents and Lance react to being denied entry opened her eyes to patterns she had overlooked, and she couldn't shake the feeling that more had been hidden from her. As she spoke, my phone buzzed with incoming texts, a lengthy thread from Shelby appearing on the lock screen. I put Whitney on speaker and opened the messages while still listening. Shelby's words poured out in several long paragraphs, expressing how badly she felt about the whole situation and how it had been eating at her since the reunion ended. She detailed how talk among relatives shifted quickly to explanations for my absence, with some suggesting I skipped it out of lingering resentment from past disagreements, or because I considered myself separate from the group now. Others circulated ideas that I had never truly prioritized family time anyway. Shelby emphasized that none of it rang true to her, and she refused to join in spreading those narratives, wanting me to hear directly that she saw through the spin. The following day, Aunt Deborah took the drive from Scottsdale down to my apartment in Phoenix. She arrived just after breakfast carrying 2 takeaway coffees and a small USB drive tucked in her purse. She said the events at the gate had prompted her to go through old computer backups late into the night, pulling together anything that might help make sense of the bigger picture. We moved to the dining table where the light was better, and she handed me the drive to load on my laptop. The files opened to an organized folder of screenshots and exported emails spanning more than a decade, conversations from mother coordinating assistance for routine bills, or sudden repairs phrased as simple family support requests. Several threads focused on bridging gaps when Lance's boat rental venture hit cash shortfalls, complete with suggestions on how to route funds discreetly. Others referenced estate upkeep costs like dock work or landscaping overhauls, noting ways to handle them without drawing too much attention. I took my time reviewing each one, matching dates to bank statements I remembered approving. Aunt Deborah sat across from me, giving space but ready with quiet comments when something stood out. Later in the afternoon, I reached out to April and asked her to come over when she had a free hour. She showed up with her usual efficiency, laying out printed copies I had prepared and diving into the materials systematically. She flagged recurring phrases and figures, then compared them against the original transfer agreement and payment logs. April's assessment was straightforward. The accumulated records built an even stronger case for my ownership and documented contributions, eliminating any viable path for disputes down the line. Sorting through those preserved messages stirred a complicated swirl of emotions. The sting returned from realizing how habitually they relied on my help, viewing it as an endless supply rather than a genuine sacrifice. Yet alongside the pain came a profound relief, as seeing the pattern laid out in their own words erased lingering self-doubt about whether I had overreacted. The blend felt intense and raw, but the undeniable proof also delivered an unexpected measure of peace and finality. A week later, my parents showed up unexpectedly in the lobby of my company in downtown Phoenix, accompanied by an older uncle they often brought in to mediate family matters. I was in a mid-morning meeting when my assistant buzzed to say visitors were waiting downstairs and insisting on seeing me right away. The security desk had already confirmed their identities, but the request felt loaded. I wrapped the call early and took the elevator down, spotting them near the reception area, Mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, Father standing stiffly in his pressed shirt, and the uncle between them with a serious expression. The uncle started speaking first as I approached, his voice calm and measured in the way he always used for these interventions. He talked about blood ties being unbreakable and how families needed to stick together through misunderstandings no matter how painful. He emphasized forgiveness as the foundation that had held the extended relatives close for generations. Mother's tears flowed more freely than her words, coming in soft bursts about how the estate had been passed down from grandfather's time and represented more than just property. It was shared history and memories everyone deserved access to. Father supported her quietly, at first maintaining his composure while adding that losing connection over legal details would regretfully fracture something irreplaceable. I suggested we move to a private conference room upstairs for privacy. Once seated around the table with the door closed, I placed a folder in the center and opened it to copies of the transfer agreement complete with their signatures, clearly visible next to the notary's seal from 4 years back. Beside it, I laid out printed summaries of payment histories, regular transfers that covered taxes, insurance renewals, and major repairs over an extended period. I explained calmly that the documents spoke for themselves and outlined the ownership change they had agreed to when capital was needed urgently. The uncle reviewed the pages carefully, asking a few clarifying questions, while Mother's tears slowed and Father shifted in his seat. I made it clear that any future communication regarding the estate or related matters would go through April Sargent exclusively. No direct contacts or unannounced visits. To underscore the point, I initiated a video call with Gregory Lawson right there. He joined promptly, screen showing his office background, and confirmed on record that all joint accounts had been closed, automatic transfers terminated, and no further financial support would flow from my side. The room fell quiet after that. Mother looked down at the table, Father stared at the documents without comment, and the uncle sighed deeply before folding his hands. They gathered their things slowly and stood to leave, the uncle shaking his head slightly, not at me, but seemingly at the situation they had created. No one argued or raised voices as they walked to the elevator. Watching the doors close behind them brought a profound sense of relief I hadn't experienced in years. The weight that had built up from constant accommodation finally lifted, leaving space for something lighter and more authentic. 1 year later, from my home office overlooking Lake Havasu, the view had become my daily anchor, wide expanse of blue water stretching to the horizon, boats gliding smoothly on calm days, and the distant hum of activity from the marina. I had made the estate my full-time base, converting one of the guest rooms into a proper workspace with large windows that let in natural light year-round. Life settled into a rhythm that felt entirely my own, free from old expectations. News about the family filtered in gradually through neutral channels. Lance lost his management position at the local boat rental company where he had worked for years. Word spread that clients and partners grew wary after rumors about reliability issues surfaced, making it hard for him to maintain the role. His marriage to Whitney deteriorated steadily in the months that followed. She eventually packed up and moved back to her parents' home in Tucson, seeking distance and a fresh start away from the tension. My parents faced their own shifts. They stopped receiving invitations to the bigger events at the Lake Havasu Yacht Club, the ones that used to fill their social calendar. People in the tight-knit community around the lake began keeping polite distance conversations turning awkward when family topics came up. The secondary house in Phoenix went on the market sooner than expected, and they downsized to a smaller place that fit their new circumstances better. Rumors circulated quietly but persistently in those circles, talk of ongoing family drama that made others hesitant to get involved. Invitations dried up, and former friends chose neutral ground or simply drifted away. It wasn't dramatic fallout, but a slow erosion of the standing they had taken for granted. My weekends filled with gatherings that felt genuine. I invited Aunt Deborah up regularly along with April and Gregory when their schedules allowed, plus a handful of close friends from Phoenix who enjoyed the drive. We spent afternoons grilling on the deck, taking the boats out for leisurely cruises and sharing stories late into the evening. The laughter came easily, conversations flowed without underlying strain, and the warmth came from real connection rather than obligation. One afternoon, a handwritten envelope arrived in the mail slot addressed in Father's distinctive script. I opened it at the kitchen counter to find a single page where he acknowledged the mistakes they had made over the years, expressing regret for the hurt caused, and admitting they had taken my support for granted far too long. The words were straightforward, no excuses attached. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in a small wooden box on the shelf with other keepsakes. I didn't reply. Some things were better left as closure rather than reopening. Looking back, the consequences showed how actions ripple outward in ways no one fully predicts. Treating relationships as transactional eventually costs more than money. It erodes trust and leaves isolation in its place. Choosing boundaries isn't cruelty. It's self-preservation that allows space for healthier connections to grow. Thank you for sticking with me through this entire story. If any part resonated or made you reflect on your own experiences, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Share below. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, pass it along.